So my brother and I, we would just go and play video poker. We would play video poker like $150, $200 a hand at 6 hands a minute. Just like hundreds of thousands of dollars of video poker every day. And then we would get comped, like at that rate, you get comped everything: room, food, beverage, like fancy rooms that we had no use for, and
Like
tickets.
king.
We saw a Mayweather fight, we saw Britney Spears, we saw Cirque du Soleil.
Welcome to the Will and Lee Show. Hi, this is Will Cheung, and I'm one of the hosts of the Will, Lee, and Andrew Show. For the last year, I've been spending a lot of time pledging this organization called FF. FF is a Chinese American fraternity, and it was established in 1910. It had Chinese Americans like I.M. Pei, the famous architect, and Wellington Koo, the Chinese ambassador that was at the founding of the United Nations. FF has lodges all over the place: New York, LA, San Francisco, Boston, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taipei. My co-host Lee is a member of the San Francisco Lodge. Welcome, Lee.
What's up, Will?
And my co-host Andrew is actively being recruited into the New York Lodge, so I hope he joins us next year. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
I met today's guest, Gil Cheung, because we both pledged FF here in LA together. Gil is Chinese American, but his parents were born in Mauritius, a small island off the coast of Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. So his parents' native tongue was French. They moved to Virginia, where Gil was born, and he grew up competing in U.S. math Olympiads and national spelling bees. Gil graduated in MIT as a computer science major, and then got into WashU Medical School in residency, which is one of the top 3 radiology programs in the United States. While he was going to medical school, went to Silicon Valley, joined a startup, and realized he didn't want to become a computer engineer and went back to medical school. Today, Gil is a partner physician radiologist at Kaiser Permanente. When his daughter Sabrina was 4, she started having seizures, and it kept him really busy as a father for many years. Thankfully, after years of searching and finding a solution, the seizures have stopped, giving him more time to pursue his own interests. With that newfound time, Gil pledged FF with me this year. I saw Gil the other day, and he told me how he was taking lunches with really interesting people, and it got me really excited because I wanted to ask you about this entire process, Gil. So really happy to have you on. Welcome, Gil.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
I never met anyone with parents from Mauritius. Tell me a little bit about what having French-speaking parents were like that were Chinese on the East Coast.
Where I grew up in Northern Virginia, at least at the time, there weren't really many Chinese or Asian kids in my school. And so it was basically me and my brother and mostly white kids. So I didn't really, I don't know, I guess it didn't seem that I knew I was Chinese, but I just figured that everyone was like us. All the other Chinese people were like us. It didn't really occur to me that, I don't know why, that Chinese people would speak Chinese or use chopsticks or stuff like that. Our culture in my family was, I haven't really met anyone else that grew up with that kind of culture. So we ate food it was like Creole sort of food, like a lot of stew type things. We did not use chopsticks. My parents, they spoke French. My brother and I, we didn't grow up learning French, but we came to understand it. So just because you just pick up I just picked up what my parents were saying to each other. It wasn't really until college that I was like, oh my gosh, there's like Chinese people, Asian people have a whole different culture that I wasn't really familiar with. And it's stuff that I think most people just take for granted about not just food and language, but just how people act, right? Like how people treat elders and how people host, and I don't know, little like mannerisms around eating, and that I just didn't know. And I'm not that, I didn't grow up. Yeah. So I've made faux pas like my whole life, just because I didn't know some of these things. And people are like, oh, you don't act Chinese at all. Like my wife, she was surprised as she got to know me. She's like, you don't act Chinese at all. And so that's kind of how it was growing up for me.
That's really interesting. Can you tell us a bit more about your parents and how they saw their identity and how they taught you to be aware of your Chinese heritage?
My parents would say that they are Chinese. My parents would say that they did teach me how to be respectful to elders and things like that. But I think that I don't know. We didn't have that many elders around because they're from Mauritius. There's not like a lot of people from Mauritius hanging around. So we are not religious. We're not part of a church community. We're not part of a cultural community. So I would say there weren't that many elders for us to be respectful to learn to do that.
How did they even get to Mauritius in the first place? Tell us a bit about their story.
So Mauritius there's a lot of Indian people. It's a real melting pot of cultures, black, white, Indian, and then like a certain percentage of Chinese. I think around three. So my parents were born in China, and then there's just a part of a Chinese diaspora landed in Mauritius, and then my parents they were smart enough to go to school in Europe, and then wanted to come to the United States for a better life. I think the thing that my parents were always super dedicated to me and my brother, and I think that's the most Chinese thing about the culture that we grew up in. Like just very extremely dedicated. Like everything is for the kids. Everything is about education. Everything is about the kids. Move to different areas for a better school district or to be closer to school and things like that. And that's one of the foundational values that I grew up with and that I've always had.
So you noticed, you're saying, you're talking about differences. What was an example of a difference in like the hosting style?
Let's say you go to eat with a bunch of Chinese people at a Chinese restaurant. And okay, so like food comes out and then you're supposed to take a little bit and or give some of the food to or help serve some other people like a little bit of food or whatever. And even down to not eating the last bit of food. I'm always just like, why don't we just do this the most efficient way possible? Just everyone take as much food as you think you're going to eat and then just eat the food. And that's just, I'm like, why would we not do that? So I would just take my food and I would just, no one's eating, everyone's eating like a little bit of food. I'm like, what? I don't know, whatever. I would just take a lot of food. Yes.
Your wife's Chinese, right?
Yes. And she'd be like, you're supposed to give me some food before you serve your stuff.
So what was that like? Basically interacting with her, interacting with her family?
It was fine. It's not like these aren't, I don't know, at least for me, they weren't like huge stumbling blocks. Maybe arguably, maybe for her family, they're like, what is up with this guy? But I guess it didn't really bother me so much. I don't think that our in-law problems are like, they're just kind of normal. So what's another example of the kind of, yeah, I guess I also, like I was saying, I don't think I grew up with just a normal respect for I don't know, I just treat young people and old people all the same. And that always made sense to me. Like, why would I treat anyone differently? But then people are like, oh, you're supposed to be much more respectful to elders. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. I didn't know that.
But that wasn't something your parents emphasized at home.
They would say that they did, and I would say that I don't really think so. And I think it's because, like I said, we didn't hang out with other adults that often. So it's not like she's like, we're going to go see like an older friend. Like, we didn't have those opportunities. So they never had got a chance to teach us that.
So it sounded like your upbringing, like your childhood was pretty academic, right? In order to get into MIT, you probably had to be pretty academic.
Yeah,
like?
Very academic. I guess that like basically tiger parenting, I would say, pushing us to do well in school. And I think that where they succeeded was they taught us to care a lot, or at least me to care a lot about how I was doing in school. Like, I cared a lot about it. That was throughout my upbringing. Like, doing well in school was the thing I wanted more than anything. Like, that I'm trying to teach that to my kids so that they'll do well in school. It's not like pushing me to study per se. It's more just like setting my motivations, like teaching a person to fish as opposed to giving them fish. It's not that they just said, hey, go study. It's more, hey, your goal should be to do really well in school, and then everything else will follow. You'll figure that out. So I don't know how normal or abnormal this is, but like for most of my childhood on my birthday, like when you make a wish, my wish was always just to get straight A's. Just for pretty much all my birthdays.
So I'm curious because now that you have kids and times have changed, right? Maybe when you were younger, I don't know, like what other extracurricular activities you were involved in. But now I think kids are being pushed into a lot of different types of exposure programs. There's coding if they want, different types of even leadership or different types of organizations. So given that you were more academically driven, is that something that you think is still like number one priority for your kids, or are you trying to give them a more holistic approach, or is there anything different from how you were raised to how you're trying to raise your kids?
The way I'm trying to raise my kids is similar to how I was raised. I mean, we did extracurriculars like music stuff and we played sports, although not organized sports because I'm just not that athletic. And I don't know, we try to expose our kids to things, but I feel like just doing well in school is foundational. That's like the baseline. And then just you can do extracurricular stuff also. I just think that doing well in school is a baseline and not just. And the way I see it is not,
That's
oh,
fair.
you need to get to a good college or anything like that. I actually just see it as a proxy for learning. Yeah,
Like
learning
hard
to work
work,
towards a goal.
like
Yeah, learning
learning
how
how
to
to
work
work
towards
hard.
a goal and overcoming the challenges and seeing that the work that you do pays off with results. And I don't know. I guess that's how I see raising the kids to do well academically.
This is really interesting to me. So yeah, tell me to you, how did you end up studying computer science?
I was always really into computers. I mean, from the first time I ever got to use a computer, and I was always fascinated by video games. And I've played so many video games growing up. I'm pretty sure I played more video games than almost anyone that I knew. But I think less than kids play video games nowadays, because I guess I'm reading stats like kids play video games like 8 hours a day, which is that's a lot, but I would play video games a lot. I did coding through high school, and there's computer team back then. I don't know if there's still computer team nowadays actually, so that we had like coding challenges and like coding questions, and so I was captain of the computer team. And yeah, so yeah, I did like lots of nerd stuff.
How did you end up in medical school?
I also just always wanted to be a doctor. I don't know. Both my brother and I, we were both computer science at MIT, and we were both pre-med at MIT. And I ended up doing medicine.
See, how does that work?
You take a few more classes. It's not that hard. You just take the medicine requirements. There's just a few, and so you just do those on top of computer science. It's really not. I'm not trying to be humble. I actually don't think it's that big a
very
deal.
easy.
Yeah, you take 4 or 5 classes at a time, right? And you can fit these in. I think being computer science or being a doctor is almost like the least imaginative stuff. Because when I was at MIT, it was basically 1/3 pre med, 1/3 computer science or electrical engineering, and the other 1/3 was like business. That's what I felt like when everyone I knew.
So then you went to med school, and then halfway through, you decide you wanted to try becoming a software engineer.
This was 1999 ish. Dot-com boom. All my friends from MIT were out in Silicon Valley, and I just wanted to see what it would be like to go out there and work. After my third year of med school, I went and got a job. They let me take 2 years off from the med school, so I had to apply to do that. And so I went and worked at a startup with my brother because he was at a startup then. And then I went and lived with him and worked at that startup for a couple years. It didn't succeed. I don't know if it was very successful, maybe things would have been different. I think that for me, the software engineering work was interesting. It was really intellectually challenging, but I felt the work I was doing didn't really affect it being a doctor would. Like I was coding features or fixing bugs, and I felt like I'm fixing bugs that no one even knows about except for me. Who cares if I fix this bug? But I was just like a coding peon. Maybe that's not the most exciting work anyway.
You think it's a product of the times? Perhaps nowadays it's just easier to start your own company, or there's more tools at your disposal to potentially work in, different aspects in tech. But looking at it now, how Silicon Valley has grown since that time. Do you ever think about like, it could have been interesting if you stayed in, if you grinded it out, decided to just give up on med school and stayed in tech?
I think it could have been. I think it would have been very interesting, but I think that like I was talking to a doctor when I was in med school that I was shadowing when I was a med student, and he said that being a doctor is like the least risky thing, uh, like the least risky and least imaginative thing, because you just go, you do well in college, you go to med school, you do a residency, and then you become a doctor, and you have a lot of job security. And but he was talking wistfully about taking risks and being in business and things like that. So what I'm getting at is I I'm amazed by people that go and succeed in business or in tech because it seems so risky to me. I'm like, wow, how did you go and start a business? Or I don't know if it was different now compared to back then. If it's different now compared to back then to start a business, it just seems like a very like, how do you know that it's going to succeed, or how do you make these decisions about what you're going to do or who you're going to hire and things like that? Coming from medicine, like these risks are things that I don't have to deal with at all. I don't know.
Yeah.
You
You also went through the dot-com bust too, right? After 1999, like everything crashed.
You know how people go through the Great Depression and that changes the way they live? Maybe that changed like my view. Oh, maybe since I was through the dot-com bust in the Bay Area, maybe I'm like, oh, startups fail. And that's what I learned. Maybe that's what got ingrained in
Yeah.
me. I don't know.
Gil, would you say you're a risk adverse person in general?
In general, I'm not risk averse, but in like life decisions, I think I'm pretty risk averse. Like gambling, I gamble a lot.
Oh,
That could
definitely have
affect your
questions
life,
about
man.
that, man.
Yeah, like when it's a question about would you gamble this much money to if you have a little edge. Like I gamble a lot.
Right.
I'm pretty sure I've gambled more than most people that you would meet.
Your nonchalance about computer science, for example. So I see that attitude with a lot of, let's say, Asian Americans. Do you think that's actually something beneficial to get rid of in American society? So kids would actually have more pride as a tool to fit in more. I think that a lot of people, they don't realize that they're quite good at something.
I think that that's true but I think that's true for everyone. That's the whole when people are not good at something, they think they are good, and then when people are good at something, they're like, "Isn't everyone good at this?"
Right. But right. There's a cognitive bias, but then,
I guess what Andrew is saying is that the way that you're talking about it seems more of like a thing that we all have as well, which is like this Asian American inability to express what's good about ourselves.
yeah. And so if you're still that way, your kids will be that way. So I'm asking, do you think there's a benefit to actually teaching your kids not to be that way and to have more pride, realize that they're special, right? And then there are kind of changes in your behavior that come with feeling special.
I should do that. Actually, you're right. That's a good point. I'll probably do that today.
We're trying to get your
Boom.
take. I wasn't trying to tell
No,
you what
I
to do.
think-
I'm just curious.
Yeah, because
Yeah, I mean, like I'm not good at selling myself or really selling anything. I'm really bad at selling things. When you say that, that's what I'm hearing. You should be able to recognize what you are good at and what you do well, or yeah, why you're special and things like that, and why that has value. And you should at least recognize that, and then hopefully be able to make that clear to people. And yeah, I'm more like my attitude towards like selling myself or selling anything that I'm offering is more like, here's this thing. If you're into it, then here it is. If you're not, that's cool. No big deal. Right? That's the way I sell things. And it doesn't really work very well. And I should teach my kids more to be assertive about because as a parent, I know their strengths and weaknesses pretty well. And I should try to make them aware of what they're good at. And yeah. Yeah.
So I agree with that, but also I'm curious, going back to Andrew's question, could it be that was that a personal kind of understanding or choice on your part? It's just not what you're interested in, or perhaps is it also what was instilled through your parents? Did they have a hand in either overtly or subconsciously affecting what you thought would be effective to other people in terms of affecting other people's lives? Did they care what major you chose, or if you were doctor, lawyer versus a computer engineer?
So I'll tell you that my mom is a doctor. Okay. And my dad is a
Mhm.
programmer. So, but I would say
Okay.
that they
Okay.
didn't
Makes sense.
ever, they weren't like, you need to be a doctor or you need to be a programmer. I think that it's more just, I don't think I have that much imagination about what I'm going to do. I'm like, here's a doctor and here's a programmer. I guess that's how you go through life. You either do one of those. And then I went to college. I was like, I'll just major in both and see how it goes. And then I'll figure out which one I like. I guess that's how I went. That's probably what I was thinking. Probably if one of them
Okay.
like was an executive or in business, I'd probably be like, well, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. So I'll just do that.
I want to ask you about your kids too, but before we talk about that, let's talk about gambling. So follow sports a lot, right? You're really into sports. Is gambling the reason why you're so into sports?
I don't really do sports gambling because I think it's hard to find an edge. I don't know the sports that well to find an edge. I'm just into sports. I think because my parents were really into sports. I don't know why they were so into sports, but they were really into the Redskins. And
So it sounds like you're not a degenerate gambler. At least you don't
um
think you are. You look for
oh,
edges.
I only gamble when I feel like I can.
So you never play craps or casino games.
I'll play craps, but I'll play it like in the most boring way possible. Just like I'll never do like hard eight or I'll never do like weird bets. I only play craps is like a great social game, so I'll play to hang out and try to lose as little money as
Yeah.
possible. But okay, so
Right. Okay.
when like college med school time, my brother and I or some friends, we'd go to Vegas, and back then everyone wanted to go to the Bellagio buffet, and the wait was like 2.5 or 3 hours, literally. And I was like, this is horrible. I can't waste my life like this. And people would skip the line. I was like, how did you skip the line? It's because the casino either comped them or gave them a line pass. And I said, how did you? And I asked them, what do you have to do to get that? And they said, you had to play blackjack for 4 hours, like at $25 a hand. And I said, okay. So then my brother and I, we were like, we don't have enough money to survive that long. So we learned how to count cards. And it's pretty easy to count cards in blackjack. So then we would just count cards so that we could not lose money and actually make some money playing blackjack. But then the thing with counting cards is that you get caught. If you know what you're doing, the casino will track you and then stop you from playing blackjack. We would never play the same table because it makes it much more obvious, but eventually you run out of casinos to go to.
Wait, so at this time, did the MIT counting team, was that like already a public knowledge amongst the students? Was that kind of also, did that go into the decision?
I mean, I was aware of that there was. I met a guy that I taught how to count cards who interacted with the team, but I didn't ever interact with anyone from that team. That team is the way they do things. They do it as a team, and then they signal to someone that the count is really good, and then those people make a huge bet. The variance is like huge, right? Like because even when the count is good, you're likely to lose that hand. You only win because of doubling up or blackjacks. So you're still a little bit likely to lose the hand. The variance is just out of control. Yeah.
The edge is razor thin.
I want to take a big step back. Could you just explain counting cards?
So I think I can do it in like a minute. Yeah. So basically in blackjack, the player has an edge when there's a lot of aces and tens, mostly because of blackjack paying 3-2. So when there's a lot of aces, because if the dealer gets blackjack, you just lost 100%. But if you get blackjack, you win 150%. So that's like a lot of the edge. And so you just count when you see a lot of twos and anything from 2 to 7, your count goes up. And then when the count's high, there's a lot of 8, 9, 8s and 9s don't count really, but there's a lot of 10s and aces in the deck. So then you want to increase your bet. Before that, you're betting the minimum.
You have a tally in your mind, right? So basically, every time you see, let's say there's like 20 cards on the table, you're quickly looking at, okay, is it between 2 to 7 plus 1? If it's like face card, it's -1. Is that how you're doing it?
Sorry, your explanation was better. Yeah, and then you have to do it, and then you have to do it quickly, but you have to do it so it doesn't look like you're doing it. You just get used to it. It's not that hard. It's really not that hard. So then you just do it, and then you just watch them. It's really not that hard.
It's really hard to
Anyone can do it.
Yeah, wait. So you have a number going up and down in your head. Do you have a multiple off of that? So let's say you're at, I mean, 10 is better. So do you, at 10, you just multiply by...
There's a cutoff where all of a sudden mathematically you have an edge, and then you want to put down a lot of money. So that's called the spread, right? So if you're at like a $25 table and then your minimum is 25 and then it goes up to 100, that's a 4-to-1 spread. And the cutoff for 3-to-1, the cutoff to make money or break even is 3-to-1 based on the system that I was using. So
What
you
does that
bet
mean?
75
3
when
to
the count
1.
is good versus 25.
Okay. So basically you're betting 25 minimum, and then when you hit that number,
I would usually play double deck, so then the count would start at -4. And if it got to +1, which is pretty easy, it's only 5. So when it got to +1, then you would start to, and then if it got really high, then I would increase the bet
yeah.
even more. Back then, and I guess even arguably now, right? Like betting like $100 or $200 on a blackjack hand was a lot. It's pretty exciting. Say what?
Yeah, for college students too, right?
Oh yeah. So
For college students as well.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
really exciting, and then it's very obvious. The dealer definitely knows that you're counting because they pay you out so that you've been betting minimum, and all of a sudden you bet like a lot, and on that hand, like
Yeah.
all these blackjacks came out, and it even changes,
Right.
like, you know how you should never take insurance, but then when the count is
Mhm.
really high, you should take
Mhm.
insurance. You had to. I do like bad acting. I'm like, maybe I'll just take insurance this time. I'll just be crazy and just take insurance, and then
That's why they have teams then, right? Because you have one person just being like just doing the betting, counting, and then once the count is high, then you bring other people over.
yes,
They
and
do the
then
crazy betting. Is that right?
exactly, and then if you don't tip the dealer, which by the way, if you tip the dealer, you're really cutting into your edge. But if you don't tip the dealer, they'll shuffle up on you. Like you put a big bet out, they're like, oh, I
Mm.
guess the count is good. So they will just say, I'm not gonna deal this one. I'm gonna shuffle. They're really they don't if they don't like you, they're gonna do that to you, and then you have to change your bet. It's embarrassing. You have like a $200 bet out, and then you move it back and you put a 25. Anyway, so then what happened was it's not really a sustainable way to do a lot of gambling. And then my brother discovered video poker, video poker, right? Okay. All right. So video
Yeah.
poker back then, and probably even now, I haven't really looked that much recently, is a beatable game. If you play video poker perfectly, you can win money. Like you will just win money. Like you have like 100.5% edge or something. But you have to play it perfectly. And there's like long sheets about what you have to do for every situation. Okay. And there's also programs that you can download. They're like little mini video poker games. And then you go through and play video poker. And whenever you make a mistake, it tells you, oh, you made a mistake. That this mistake cost you like 30 cents or something like that. So my brother and I, we would just go and play video poker. We would play video poker like $150, $200 a hand at 6 hands a minute. Just like hundreds of thousands of dollars of video poker every day. And then we would get comped, like at that rate, you get comped everything: room, food, beverage, like fancy rooms that we had no use for, and
Like
tickets. We saw a Mayweather fight, we saw Britney Spears, we saw Cirque du Soleil, and then those casinos would send us like 20% of my mail would be like casino mailers saying, hey, come, we'll fly you, free hotel and food. Like,
Wait, so are you allowed to print out or have all the right plays on your phone or like on a laptop? Because you know how in blackjack, they don't care if you have basic strategy printed out. In fact, they'll tell you. They don't encourage it, but they're okay with it. Video poker, do they allow you to do that? To play perfectly?
yeah, you can do whatever you want in video poker. Like you can, so we would have the printout and we would sit on it, and because usually we know, but then if we were like, oh, I'm not sure if like I'm not sure if I'm supposed to go for the straight here, or if I'm supposed to go for the pairs or whatever.
You can check.
We would take out and check. But it's the great thing about video poker is it's not like blackjack. Like they're never going to stop you, or they never ever stopped you. They would so we would play, and if you get like a royal flush, it's like $20,000. Oh, and you need to get some royal flushes. That's part of the edge. So if you don't, you're okay. So if you don't get those royal flushes, you're down that $20,000 or something. You're going to be down like that much money, like a lot. So that was like big swings, and then you get like a royal flush, and then my brother and I, we would just be like screaming and hollering in the video poker section. There's no one else there. And people are like, what the hell is going on over there? Like, people are like at the tables, which is the fun part of gambling. But this is basically like a job.
Wait, so in video poker, then you have to play a lot of hands in order to gain that edge, because you're not going to sit down and hit a royal flush. Like, it's going to take thousands of hands, hundreds or thousands, if not more, just so that the variance evens out, or that you will be able to hit those monster pots that will bring you back. Because otherwise, you'll probably be dipping the negative often, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah. That's what I'm saying. There were some real dark times. Real dark.
Oh, no. Are you up or down? Like, do you keep like a book?
We're up. Overall, we're up.
Okay. How much? Can you tell us?
Probably some thousands. Probably 4 or 5 digits. That's it. Not 6 digits or something.
Probably like hundreds.
The comp,
right?
I don't know. The comps, you have to burn those comps like on that trip. They don't carry over. So one time we had just like a ton of comps.
But you're eating,
oh my God.
you know.
We would eat ridiculous. And then it's bad because I would often go like with my brother. And when I had a lot of these super fancy meals, I would just go with I didn't take my wife. Whatever, I was just with my brother, so it would just be me and my brother having this. One time we went to the Bellagio, we were at some restaurant, and we told the waiter, like, this is comped, so we want to spend as much money as possible. This was during the blackjack time. Okay, so we didn't have a ton of comp money. We had just like a comped meal. And so we told the waiter, we want to blow as much money as possible. And so he helped us choose like the most expensive stuff. And then afterwards, the casino called me and they were like, hey, they called us into an office and we comped you, but we didn't mean like this. I think the waiter got it. And then I was like, we're like, you told like you told college students that they had a free meal. So you told Chinese
How much was that meal?
college students
what did you guys
that you
have?
had a free meal. I don't know what you thought was going to happen. Like, and then I didn't say that.
Do you remember how much that meal was?
These are like, I don't know. They I don't know. By today's standards, maybe they're not that much, but like before wine, and I don't think that the wine was. We wouldn't get like fancy wines or whatever because that could really blow it up. But it was like $1,000 something, or between $1,000 and $2,000 for the two of us or something, which was like a lot for food. That's like a lot. I don't know. Like they cut up stuff like next to our table, and we're just chowing. It was ridiculous. But I think the waiter may have gotten in trouble. I feel bad about that. Anyway, yeah, we would go to these. I'm not good at appreciating good food anyway, so it was a little bit lost on me. And then one time, like, we had like tons of money left over at New York, and we were like, we were asking the host, like, where can we use all this comp money that we have left over? At that time, there was ESPN Zone there, which is a restaurant. You can only use the comp money on restaurants, so you can't just go to the gift shop of the casino. But the ESPN Zone has a gift shop, so it's a restaurant and it has a gift shop. So we just went into the ESPN Zone gift shop, my brother and I, and we're just taking everything in the shop. We're just like, there's no shopping carts, but we're just like all these shirts, boxers, shot glasses, poker chips, just like everything in the ESPN Zone. And people are like, what are these idiots doing? And I still have quite a bit of ESPN stuff. Like, we took so much ESPN. Yeah. Every t-shirt that was even wearable, like, whatever. I have like a lot of ESPN t-shirts. Anyway, so that's...
So did you guys ever get caught, Gil, in blackjack?
Yeah. Yes.
But were you guys just reprimanded, or were you actually told you could not play any more blackjack? Like, what was the response from the casinos?
Oh, yeah. They come and they tell you can't play any more blackjack. Yeah. And then you just take your chips, and then people at the table are like, they're like, wait, people will be like, wait, what's going on? He's a nice guy. What are you doing? And then I'm like, oh, it's all right. It's okay. Sorry. I'll just be on my way.
Was this like a permanent ban? If you went to Vegas today, are you on their blacklist in their database?
I think I'm theoretically on their blacklist. I doubt that they would. I have played blackjack, like some, just like for a few hands, maybe for 15 minutes or something. And I don't think they would care really. Or maybe I'm not. This was like 20 years ago. I don't know. I actually don't know. I actually think they wouldn't care. Maybe they would. And then I actually think the blackjack countermeasures are better now. I think that they automatically track. You don't think so?
I would think so. Yeah. They probably would just recognize you through like the facial recognition software,
Yeah,
if
I think that
anything.
it's much harder to count now, and it's probably much harder to do. See, because part of the reason this video poker thing was so ridiculous was the casinos, they were counting video poker play the same as slots play. Okay, if you play $1 of slots, you expect to get back like 85 to 90 cents. Like the edge on slots for the casino is huge. But there is no edge for the casino on video poker. But they would count that slot play. They would say your expected loss. They just, I don't know why, but they just did it all the same. They're just really dumb back then. So then that's why the comps would get so huge for video poker, because they thought that they just counted, oh, you played hundreds of thousands of dollars of video poker, you just played hundreds of thousands of dollars of slots, you lost so much money, I'm sure, here's all this stuff. That's basically how they were doing things.
But I think also comps these days, it is based off of, for example, if you play $25 blackjack and you're obviously not counting and you get a room, you'd have to probably play like 4 hours at the tables in order, you got to give them a chance to
Yeah.
win your money. And if you're not counting, then you don't have an edge. You're 48, whatever, 47 point something percent to win. So they know over time they're going to get your money. And even if you don't lose on this trip, you play enough hours, mathematically, over the long run, you're going to lose. But if in video poker, statistically, they allow you to have the right plays side by side while you play, it sounds, if they just ran the numbers, they would know they're just like losing on comps if you are that type of player. So I'm surprised they didn't ban you.
It was just the system that they set up, and then they just didn't really recognize that they were losing money on a certain aspect.
Yeah,
of their system,
I think
most likely.
that's exactly correct. I think that they're just workers, right? They're casino hosts. They're like like the people that want to do this kind of thing. It's like a very small percentage of people, because it was like yeah.
Yeah, no, but they have a whole team that are basically, they know like what the statistics are in all the games. They would never have a game out there that
Oh,
they don't have an edge, unless, other than poker, other than baccarat, if you only, bet in a very particular way, it's always 50-50. But for the general public, all the games are always casino edge. I'm just thinking, yeah, maybe they've plugged all these holes that existed
I'm sure
over the
they've done
years.
sure than that.
My guess is that the video poker, it was measured on the whole and not on an individual.
No, it's definitely because
20 years ago.
Maybe.
Well, the thing about video poker, it's not like slots where you do it and then you just get a result, right? Video poker, you actually have to press buttons in order to get a reaction, in order to get money. So I'm sure as a whole, video poker players are losing a lot of money.
That's
right?
what I mean.
As a whole, yeah, but still, they're not gonna. So it's the same thing, right? They're not gonna let a few college kids count just because everyone else is losing at blackjack, right?
Well, the general rule in the casino is the harder the game, the smaller the casino edge, right? Where you're saying slots is the easiest game, so the casino has a huge edge, right? The more decisions you have to make, the smaller casino edge. So there were websites for video poker that would tell you, because not even like the same looking video poker machine would not, if it doesn't have the correct payouts on the pay table, if they're off by $5 on one thing, it's a huge difference. And
it makes a huge difference.
There were databases on the web that would tell you where in the casino the machines were,
because the Indian casinos have different rules.
Yeah, and it would update all the time
too,
like,
so.
And they did start to. I think those holes are plugged mostly now. So the Las Vegas shooter, right? That guy, that's how he lived. He just played video poker. There's like people, you see them when we were playing that were just, they played video poker. They live in Vegas. They play video poker more than we did, and they would go from wherever to like casino to like rack up bonuses and. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So
I just want to say one thing though about
yeah.
So that experience of gambling that much money, it really taught me about like variance and math and like having to trust the math, because you're down like thousands of dollars. You're like you have to trust that you have the math right, or that the math is right. And also, okay, for the vaccine, the COVID vaccine. And people are like, oh, what, you have a 99.5% chance of living, or 99.5% chance of surviving. And then the vaccine's only 95% effective, and I'm like, these are huge numbers. That is 0.5% is like huge. I don't know. I think gambling that much really teaches you how much like a small percentage matters, right? Because you might have, here's an example. Okay. sometimes in video poker you're dealt like a flush right away, which is like a huge payout. It's like a 8-1 payout or something, or 10-1 payout. But if it's if it's one away from a royal flush, like king, queen, jack, 10 hearts, and then and then like an 8 of hearts, say, you have to throw away that 8 of hearts. You have to throw away the flush to go for the royal flush. Like, you have to. It's not even you have to. Otherwise, you've thrown away like a massive amount of money. And I think people don't understand. Like, people are like, I have a made hand here, right? Why would I throw this away? I'm going to make $400 right here. You have to. I don't know. Gambling, blackjack also. People will be like, you get to hit, right? Basic strategy. Usually you're playing basic strategy. I have to hit, and then you bust. And I shouldn't have hit. You have to do the right. Mathematically, you have to make the correct decisions. And what happens is less important than just making the correct decisions.
Is that something that you apply to life?
Yeah, I think smart people do that, right? They focus on the process and the decisions, and then try to make the highest expected value decision, and then be okay with whatever happened. Whatever happened is less important, the result, than did you make the right decision.
Yeah. We talked about this during pledging, but I wanted to dive into a little bit more was your daughter, Sabrina. So when she was 4, she started getting seizures. Can you explain what was that like as a father, and what were you seeing as she was getting more and more severe?
When she was 4, she started to do this thing like a few times a week where she would spin in a circle, okay, for a few seconds, like 10 seconds or 5 to 10 seconds. And she was conscious, and she would be like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know. Like, she would just turn around in a circle. And I was working and my wife was working, and I was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know, probably nothing. And she's 4. I don't know if she's scared of something because it was around Halloween. But then my wife was like, I think she might be having seizures. And I said, there's no way she's having seizures, because I'm a neuroradiologist. What are the chances? I'm a neuroradiologist. What are the chances my daughter is having seizures? Ridiculous. But it turns out she was having seizures. So she started having them like a few times a week. And then she started to quickly have them a few times a day, then like 10 times a day, then 20 times a day, then like 40 times a day. It was still just like a few times a day. I took her in and they did an EEG, and she's having seizures. And then we started her on medicine. And the thing is, with seizures, most of the time, the first 50% of the time, the first medicine works. And then another 40% of the time, the 2 medicines work. But the medicine barely touched it. We went to a specialist who ramped up the medicine much faster. And eventually we got to a point where she would have seizures like a few times a day. And this was with multiple medications, 3 or 4, usually 4. And she had been developmentally normal before that. But then these seizure medications, like when you're on multiple ones, they interact, and she was having a lot, like she was completely different. Like, she could not do normal work. She would have seizures at school. She went from being pretty bright, and then this is like 3rd grade, and to get her to write a sentence would be like 15 minutes of telling her exactly what to write this word. It was just, she couldn't like you tell her to do something and she just couldn't do things. She was in special ed classes. If this wasn't clear, she's completely failing everything. Like, she couldn't take a test. It's not that she would get questions wrong, like she just wouldn't be able to do it. And we had to follow her pretty much everywhere. When she was at school, she had a constant aide that would be next to her in case she had a seizure, so she wouldn't hurt herself. And then they would go with her to the bathroom. And then at home, we would just follow. If she wanted to go to another room, we had to follow her. If we take her to a park, we had to follow her. If she wants to go to the bathroom, we had to follow her, because she could have a seizure. And at that point, it wasn't just spitting. She would fall, and she would kick her feet. She'd fall, and she would hurt herself if she was by herself. I mean, at that point, and then, so we tried, I don't know, 15 medications, or we tried like a lot of different medications, including like cannabis-based medication and just everything. We're not religious. A friend said that she was friends with a faith-based healer, and we did that. And I don't know, I thought that was nice that she did that for us, even though I don't really believe in it per se. But so yeah, we just did a lot of different things. And I think at that point we basically have I actually don't know what politically correct you're supposed to say, but whatever. We had a disabled child at that point, and so a child that requires like 100% care. And as a parent, it was, yeah, like kind of the death of a lot of my dreams for, I guess, my personal dreams for what I wanted for my children, and that was tough. And I don't know, I thought, but I wouldn't say, I think I was pretty down about, I think that my wife and I were pretty down about the whole thing. And it sounds really bad, but I also think that when you're in a situation, you just get used to it. Like most of life in terms of becoming happy and sad, I think is about like the delta. If you're at one level and then something good happens, then you're happy. But then when you get back there, you just normalize. You pretty much get used to anything. And then imaging wise, and by imaging I mean like MRIs and CAT scans and stuff like that, which is my job. There was nothing on the imaging to say that there's anything that we could cut out. Oh, because that's what you want to do. You want to see something that's causing the seizures, and then you want to have a surgeon cut it out when it's this bad and when it's refractory to medications. Okay, that's what you want to do. We had gotten MRIs and nothing was showing up, but then we did a last ditch PET scan, which is usually for cancer, but it's a positron emission tomography, and they give you sugar bound to a radioactive unstable molecule, and then the sugar glucose gets taken up in your body, and then it goes to parts of your body that are metabolically active, and that's why they use it for cancer. So it gets taken up by cancer cells, and then they put you in a scanner, and the scanner tells you where in the body that was. We did a brain PET MRI fusion, so then they do an MRI at the same time as they do a PET scan to see where it's metabolically active in your brain. We got that done at UCLA, and it was read as negative. There's nothing interesting. There's no asymmetry or whatever. There's nothing interesting here going on. But I called my professor who I trained under at UCLA in neuroradiology, and I asked her to take a look, Noriko Salomon. And she said, I think there's actually a subtle thing here. I think there's a subtle change here, and in the left frontal lobe. And so it's read officially on the report at UCLA as negative, but my professor was like, I think there's actually something here. So if she didn't do that, my daughter's life and our lives are completely different. But then she did that. So she found that. So then we went to UCSF to do a MEG scan. It's basically like a super EEG, okay? And there's only two in the state of California. One's at UCSD. There's one at UCSF. There's none in LA, oddly. And it's basically like putting a Magneto hat on your. It's really very similar. Oh no, not Magneto. Cerebro, the X-Men Cerebro. It's like putting a Cerebro hat on your head. It's got a lot of magnets, and it's very sensitive EEG, and that also localized a lesion to her left frontal lobe. So then we asked around to get a surgeon. We talked to a surgeon in LA. We talked to a couple surgeons in LA, but I talked to my friend who did neurosurgery, and I talked to a bunch of other neurosurgeons, and they all said that this one dude in Seattle at UW was the guy to go to. So we went to Seattle to get it taken out. Okay. And at that time, again, she's having a few seizures a day. December 8th, 2016, it had been 4 years of these seizures. So she had surgery on that day, and so she had seizure that we had to get up at like 5 a.m. It was brutal. And then we went to Seattle to the Children's Hospital, and so right there she stopped having seizures. So she still does have seizures sometimes now. So it's not like perfect story, but then she stopped having seizures though right after that surgery. And even on that trip to Seattle, she was like very different. Like she could listen to, you tell her to do something, she'd actually do it. Tie your shoes or close a door. She'd actually do it. And it's a very strange feeling that she could actually function normally, more normally. It was really exciting. And yeah, so she's just stopped having seizures because they took that thing out of her brain. And yeah, so it was let's see here. And then it's not just the seizures that was really holding her back. She was on like 3 or 4 medications, one of which was always a benzodiazepine. Sorry, you'd know it as Valium. She's on Valium every day. And then we immediately, over the next year and a half, we got to taper her medications. Oh, and she was also on a ketogenic diet. So That's like a thing, like 100 years ago or whatever, when before there was medications, people would starve people to stop them from having seizures. You go into ketosis. So ketosis is helpful for seizures. So she was on a ketogenic diet. She didn't get to eat bread, candy, pasta, or whatever. If the teacher gave candy out to everyone, she would have to get like an eraser or something. And it was so not only do we have to follow her everywhere, we had to make her food. We cannot cook. We're not good at cooking. We can't cook, but we would have to weigh out to tenths of a gram her meals, and her meals are some nuts, like some spinach, some vegetables, and every meal we had to weigh out to tenths of a gram, and we had to do all this math to see because she's on a certain ratio of like fat to. If you ever done ketogenic diet, you have to be fat and protein to sugar, and it's just so little sugar. She ate like tons of butter, tons of whipped cream, a lot of bacon, and anyway, so we got to wean off all of that, including the ketogenic diet. And so then over the next few years, she's essentially developed, now she's basically normal. I don't know, like any difficulties or problems she may have at school, it's hard to tease that out from normal development versus essentially brain damage. And she's had brain damage because she got part of her brain taken out, and then the seizures caused damage after a while. So then a year or two ago, she started to have seizures again, but they were much more mild. They were not as much motor. They would just be like a feeling that would come over her for a few seconds. And she said that it feels like the seizures. So then we got an EEG, and she's having seizures again. Now she's on, but then we've been able to control it with medication in the past 2 years. So she's on a couple of drugs, and she seems to be tolerating them pretty well. But even those seizures, like she could be swimming and have one of those seizures, and she'd be like with the seizures the way they are now, because they're just like emotion and like emotion for a little bit. But like before, if she had a seizure when she's swimming, she would drown. So we even like when I would take, we had a pool, but if she goes to swim, I had to be right next to her like the entire time. Anyway, I think that's pretty interesting because it's interesting in general. But we were parents of a special needs kid, and it's very uncommon, I think, for someone to be a parent of a special needs kid that needs all that attention, and then to not like for that situation to resolve. Usually that's going to be a permanent situation. And I don't know, that's how I saw my identity was essentially parent of a special needs kid. That's who I was. That's how I saw myself. And I don't know if a friend would introduce me to another friend, that's probably what they would say, right? Oh, this guy is a parent of this guy's kid has seizures, and that's why he's always following his kid around. And that's like what he does. We never went out. Like we never ever went out because it's just like too much of a pain to get a babysitter who can deal with this situation. So we never went out for like those years.
That one decision of not doing computer science and going into med school and becoming a radiologist actually changed your life and your daughter's life.
Oh, yeah.
You basically, it was a miracle, right? This is a miracle. And you created that miracle.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
I guess so. Yeah. But then I guess, okay. So that's true, right? Yeah, but then just to put a point on it, I guess the decision to go into neuroradiology, right? Because if I didn't go to med school, I wouldn't have met my wife. But then if I didn't do neuroradiology, then I wouldn't have been able to ask my neuroradiology professor to take a look at the thing.
Yeah, because if you were just a normal person, you wouldn't even know who to go to or the right questions to ask even. And because you had this network and because you knew what you were talking about, you were able to get the probably the top experts in the United States to help you take a look at this problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I agree with that. But then, I don't know. The thing is that ideally you do that surgery like before the kid is 5 years old because the brain has neuroplasticity until you're like in your teens or whatever. She got the surgery at 8. Like they won't even, this is my understanding, but this was my understanding at the time. If you're 15, you don't have enough neuroplasticity to recover from taking out like that wedge of your brain, so they just don't do it. So ideally, we would have done it by the time she was 5. She started having seizures when she was 4. So I feel guilt. I feel bad about that. That's not good.
You must have felt guilt too because like this is your job, right? This is what you do for a living. You look at these scans and you identify the problems in these scans, and not being able to find that for your daughter must have been really tough.
Yeah, actually, when we were at Seattle Children's, I went down to the reading room, the MRI reading room, to look at the scans. And then a resident or fellow was like, oh, you could see the lesion back here. Like, a few years ago. And I don't know. I thought that was pretty annoying because you can't, okay, in radiology,
Yeah.
you can often look back and say, oh, you can hallucinate stuff. There's something here, or what? Like, I had a professor that I was sitting with, and we're like looking at a neck scan, and I was like, oh, this the lesion's on the left. And then she's like, oh, yeah, you can see it here. And then I was like, oh, wait, I didn't do this on purpose, but I was like, actually, it's on the right. And she's like, oh, okay, yeah, you can see it. This happens in radiology, and people don't understand like that. That's a cognitive bias. And then to say, I had looked at these scans from years ago, like a lot, and I had my professor look at all those scans. And she's, for my money, she's the best pediatric or maybe even neuroradiologist, period, like in Los Angeles. But it's not like I go talk to all of them. I don't know. But, and she said, no, there's just nothing here. There's nothing you could see here. But then for a dude, a trainee, to tell me, the dad, like, oh, you could have seen it here like a few years ago.
Yeah.
I'm like, you fucking idiot. Like, what?
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah.
Why would you tell it? That is insane to think that you would do that to someone. Like, oh, you could have caught this years ago. And I can see it. It's right here. Anyway, that's like a rant.
Yeah.
Two questions. In my understanding, because of the complexity of our brains and our bodies in general, it's something that is a continued process, and it's not something that we know everything about. We're still learning in terms of how to diagnose and how to deal with certain very complex and things that we don't understand. So how do you think about approaching your job, and just how you've changed as a parent and as a person throughout this process?
After the surgery, I was like, oh, I guess I'm, how I was saying that I saw myself as a parent of a kid with seizures. That was my identity. And then I was like, oh, I need a new, I need a new identity. Like, it's a weird thing, but I'm like, oh, I'm not that anymore. So I don't know. It's not like I have to go find one, but I am not that anymore. That's a really weird experience, just to be a different thing. I guess when people go through life changes in general, maybe if you're married and then you get divorced, I'm a divorced person. So maybe people have that pretty often, but that was pretty weird to me. I'm not sure it changed my parenting. I guess it's more, maybe I'm more like, what happens, right? This was a pretty unlucky thing to have happened, but maybe I'm a little bit more, not everything's going to be perfect, and you just have to, whatever happens, and you have to try to make the right decisions to deal with the situation, the hand that you're dealt. It might have made me feel a little bit more like that. I think I feel very fortunate in that, like, if this happened 50 years ago, right, that surgery doesn't exist. None of that technology exists to resolve this situation. Even the drugs that she's on now, they don't exist. I guess I'm more just like, shit happens and you have to just deal with it. It was a weird thing to start to be like, oh, I guess we could go out to dinner or see some people, or like even stay in a hotel. Like, we couldn't even stay in a hotel because we needed a kitchen to get all this food together for her diet. Yeah, we had to get Airbnbs that had kitchens and stuff like that.
As part of that world opening up to you, like, also basically what you're telling me allowed you to pledge for FF and meet people.
My world was pretty small, basically just work and home. And I got to go out and hang out with people and make friends. Again, I grew up on the East Coast, so I didn't know that many people in Los Angeles. Basically, I knew my coworkers and I knew some of the parents from the school, but it's really hard to have play dates because of the way things were. I think like FF is really cool in that it's very interesting people from all different walks of life. And let's say you already have a full social life in wherever city and like you're busy all the time. Maybe FF is not something that someone has room for, but then people that, like in my situation where I didn't really know that many people, it's good to all of a sudden be connected to. And I've called up some of these guys and I'm like, hey, can we get lunch? You can't just do that to people normally. Hey, can I get lunch with you? And so a lot of these guys, their time is super valuable. They might charge like $200, $500, $1,000 an hour just to consult. And I'm like, oh, like this is a guy I'd probably pay to talk to for like an hour. But I'm like, hey, I could just go get lunch with this guy. and try to learn from this guy. And I'm kind of playing on their almost obligation to talk to me. They're like, whatever, this guy joined, I guess I better talk to him.
Our first conversation, right? You and me, because there's 4 of us that was pledging this year. Everyone in the pledge class is super interested. Gil is one of the most interesting people that I've met, but also Chris and Shane are also incredibly interesting too. But Chris and Shane at the time when we were pledging, were out of town. And so you and me met up and we did the down but not out. So basically we took food and we took clothes and we walked downtown LA and gave out to the homeless. And it was like from 6 p.m. till 11 p.m. So it was like late at night, and you were just you and I had a wagon, and we were just talking about FF and like why we were joining it. And you asked me why I was joining it, and I was like, because even though I'm much younger than everyone, at least like everyone at FF will give me an hour. And so if I can ask an hour from them and just learn from them, that's what at least my end goal would be. Like at the minimum, I at least have that. And then now 3 to 6 months later, I see you and we're at an FF event, and I'm like, hey, what are you up to? And I'm like, oh, I've had lunch with this person and this person, and this is all the things that we talked about. I got super excited because, man, Gil is doing exactly what I wanted to do or am doing. And I just seeing that from that evolution of Gil being that doctor to Gil like having lunch with all these cool people. I just wanted to say, like, man, I'm so happy for you. And tell me a little bit more about just taking these lunches, and because this wasn't something that you used to do, and so you're doing this now. What has that experience been like?
Oh, I mean, it's been really great, because when we were pledging, like, you did that with some guys, and it takes some energy. And even though I'm an extroverted person, it takes energy and activation energy to like email or call up a text a guy or whatever that you basically don't know, and say, hey, can we get lunch, and then talk to them and then engage for an hour or so. So especially during the pledge process, we were pretty busy. So I did it a few times, like over Zoom, talking to people, but I always felt like I should do it more. And now after we have done most of those activities, like I have more energy and time, and they're uniformly all interesting people that are doing things that, like, I think so much stuff is very interesting to me that people do. Again, because I'm just a doctor. So you go to med school, whatever, residency, and you just go work. It's basically you're just a professional person. And just people that do business or even like how like lawyers work, and how they bring in business, or the whole thing, just so what people do is really interesting to me. And because like I'm 45, but I don't know, they force you to retire here at where I work at 65. And but a lot of people take early retirement at 58. So I'm looking at what will my next phase of life be? Like, what am I going to do? Or what can I do with my life that scales, right? You guys are in business, right? So everything's about scaling. But as a professional, when you're a doctor, nothing you do scales. You are a doctor. You work an hour, you get paid by the hour, essentially. Yeah. Like talking and I'm like, man, how did these guys get into like what they got into? It's crazy to me. It's super interesting. I love that stuff. Yeah.
I think it's really cool because once you take an interest in someone, you want to figure out how they got to where they are. I think they also open up too, and they're happy to share, and you learn so much. And I think it's a really good way.
Yeah. And I don't even know what I said about like why I wanted to join FF. It was probably like a really stupid, boring answer or something.
It was the daughter thing, I think. It was like, now that you're no longer a special needs dad, like you want to meet people outside of
like I remember, so right, if I tell someone like about FF, I would sell it really badly. I would be like, oh, there's a bunch of guys and we do things. But like Joe Cha, who sponsored me, like, and he said this, I heard this I think he said this right on your podcast. He's the kind of guy that can sell ice to an Eskimo, right? Yeah. He's like the opposite. And he sold me on a FF. You need to do this, and these are all these great things. I was like, oh, that sounds really good. And then I tell my wife, and I'm like, oh no, it's a bunch of guys. And she's like, what are you talking about? Why would you want to do that? It's just like,
take it or leave it. Anyway. This is how it is. Yeah. No, I'm glad I got to meet you. I think the coolest thing for me with FF is that I got to pledge with people that are older than me and seeing how their life is and like getting to like really know them. I think that was probably the biggest benefit I've had so far
Yeah.
at FF. Do you guys want to say anything else before we end the interview?
Oh, just to add to that point, I think, yeah, if it wasn't for FF, I would never have gotten the chance to know Gil, and we wouldn't be here talking about all these interesting things. And so that's something that I think sells itself, but you got to be in a place in the right mindset to be able to take some time to reach out and to experience what it means. So I think I'm just glad that I'm a part of it and that you guys have joined. And so this is like the whole reason for me. I'm looking forward to, I think this was fascinating for me. I didn't know a lot of these things kind of just superficially about Gil before, but we should definitely do this again. This was very fun.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing I liked about the whole process was that it got me well outside of my comfort zone. And you just learn so much when you're outside your, whatever, that's where you grow, or that's where I grow, or where I learn a lot. Like even when you asked, hey, do you want to go on this podcast? I was like, honestly, my first reaction was like, no, that sounds risky or uncomfortable. But then I was like, oh, actually, you know what? I should get outside my comfort zone and just do it, right? And get something out of this. Like, I probably will get something out of this. And that's why I try to tell my kids, like, you have to do stuff that you don't want to do. Usually you have to do stuff you don't want to do. And that's how you're going to grow.
Yeah, no, you did a really good job. It was really compelling. And thank you for joining.
Yeah. All right. Cool. I hope to hang out with you, Andrew, when we're in the same city. And it's good to talk to you guys.
All right, thank you.
All right. Thank you for your time. It was very compelling. Really enjoyed it.
Right. Okay.
Hey, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks
Bye.
for making it to the end of the episode. You can find show notes, links, and contact info for us and our guests at our website, willandlee.show. We love feedback, so please feel free to drop us a note with any thoughts or suggestions. Lastly, if you like what you heard, we'd really appreciate you adding ratings to our episodes. Thanks for listening. Until next time.